The whole town was certain the little girl was born blind. Her mother believed it, the doctor swore it, but Ranger, a Navy SEAL's war dog, sensed it was a lie. When a tennis ball glided silently over the diner floor, the girl didn't just sit. Her eyes tracked its movement. Why was she living in this world of darkness? The truth this Navy SEAL would unearth was no miracle. It was a crime that would shatter the city's soul. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story finds a place in your heart, please subscribe for more. The air in Savannah was never simply hot. It was a physical weight, a thick, damp blanket of humidity that smelled of salt, marsh-blooming jasmine, and the exhaust of 1,000 idling engines. It was an atmosphere that clung to the skin and slowed the pulse, making the Spanish moss on the ancient live oaks look like the tattered gray banners of a spectral army. Watching the city breathe, Rowan Scott expertly guided his matte black motorcycle with the practiced precision of a man who'd spent his adult life operating in the world's most high-stakes environments. He was a Tier 1 operator, an active-duty Navy SEAL on mandatory medical leave after a kinetic deployment to the Horn of Africa. Though his posture suggested anything but relaxation, his eyes hidden behind dark aviators scanned the perimeter with a familiar, predatory intensity, dissecting the street for threats that didn't exist. In the custom sidecar sat Ranger, a 90-pound sable German shepherd. Ranger was a multi-purpose canine, a weapon of war concealed as a dog sitting there with a profound, regal stillness. He wore protective goggles to shield his eyes from the wind. They were a single unit, a system of man and beast now trying to learn how to exist in a world moving far too slow for their internal clocks. Rowan brought the bike to a smooth stop before a weathered establishment. On the fringe of the historic district where manicured lawns surrendered to cracked pavement, the neon sign above the door buzzed like a dying insect spelling out the rusty anchor. It had the look of a place that poured honest, strong coffee and asked no questions, which was exactly what Rowan needed. He killed the engine, the sudden silence ringing in his ears as he signaled for Ranger. "Heel," Rowan murmured, his voice a low rumble just above the street noise. Ranger obeyed instantly, muscles rippling beneath his dark fur, falling into perfect step at Rowan's left knee. As they pushed through the door, the shift in worlds was immediate. The oppressive humidity of the Georgia coast was replaced by the smell of old grease and sharp lemon cleaner, and the aggressive chill of an overworked air conditioner. The diner was nearly empty, holding a few long-haul truckers hunched over plates and a couple of locals absorbed in newspapers. Rowan took a booth in the back corner, instinctively placing his back against the wall, keeping the entire room in his field of vision. Ranger slid silently under the table, curling into a watchful ball near Rowan's boots, effectively vanishing from sight. After a moment, a waitress approached their table, wiping her hands on a frayed, faded apron. Cassidy Vance looked like she held the weight of the entire world on her narrow shoulders, yet she carried it with a quiet, stubborn dignity. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with soft features hardened by sheer exhaustion and hair escaping a messy bun. Her uniform was clean, but worn thin, and her eyes held a deep sadness that Rowan recognized instantly. "Afternoon," she said, her voice carrying a soft, musical southern lilt, though it was frayed around the edges. "You beat the lunch rush, just barely. Can I get you started with some sweet tea, or are you looking for something stronger?" Rowan removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold and assessing. "Coffee," he stated, his tone clipped but not entirely unkind. "Black and the burger rare." Cassidy froze her pen suspended over the notepad, her eyes drawn to the tactical watch on his wrist, and the way he commanded his space with a quiet, undeniable force. "Coffee it is," she murmured, a polite smile flickering but never reaching her eyes. "You from around here got that look. Someone just passing through?" Rowan's expression remained unchanged. "Just passing through," he affirmed. Cassidy nodded. She was used to the quiet stoicism of strangers. "Well, holler if you need anything else." she said, turning to head back towards the kitchen. Rowan's gaze tracked her every move, not out of attraction, but from a deeply ingrained habit of total situational awareness. And that was when his methodical scan settled on a small table tucked into a shadowy corner, almost swallowed by the dim lighting. There sat a young girl no older than 7, small and pale, with hair like spun gold, holding herself with an unnerving stillness. Beside her chair rested a white cane with a distinct red tip. This was Penny Vance, the very daughter Cassidy couldn't afford childcare for. Penny stared straight ahead, her eyes milky and unfocused, fixed on a point in space that existed only in her own world. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll left on a shelf. Then, Rowan felt a deep vibration through the floorboards. Under the table, Ranger. The same dog who held a downstay while helicopters landed 50 feet away now let out a low, trembling whine. Rowan went still. "Quiet," he whispered a sharp command. Ranger defied him, crawling out from under the table. His ears pricked forward, his body taut. His focus wasn't on the kitchen, he was staring directly, unblinkingly at the blind girl. Cassidy returned with the coffee pot, and the sight of the massive German shepherd made her gasp, the mug nearly slipping from her grasp. "Oh, I didn't see him come in," she stammered, stepping away. Rowan immediately reached down. His bicep flexed as he gripped Ranger's collar. "He's not a pet," Rowan said, his voice firm. "Ranger Place." The dog hesitated, a brief defiance that sent a spike of pure adrenaline through Rowan's system before it reluctantly sat, though his eyes never left the girl. "I apologize," Rowan said, looking up at Cassidy. "He's usually disciplined." Cassidy exhaled, a hand pressed to her chest. "It's all right. He's beautiful, just big. Penny won't mind, though." She gestured toward the girl in the corner. "She doesn't even know he's there. She's blind." Rowan's gaze shifted to the girl, then back to his dog, still trembling with focus. "Blind." He repeated the word, hanging in the stale air. "Since the day she was born," Cassidy whispered. "Retinopathy, the doctors called it. She's never seen a single thing." Rowan watched as Cassidy moved to check on her daughter. "Hey, sweetie," Cassidy said softly, approaching the small girl. "I'm just checking on your water." And then Rowan saw it. As Cassidy reached out to smooth Penny's hair, the girl flinched. It was subtle, a movement so fast a civilian would have missed it completely. Penny's head tilted her shoulder, jerking back a split second before Cassidy's hand made contact. "Mommy?" Penny asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "Is there a wolf here?" Cassidy gave a gentle laugh, stroking her hair. "No, baby, just a big dog. A nice dog." Rowan's eyes narrowed. As a sniper, he was trained to notice a single blade of grass shift. Penny had reacted to the touch before it ever landed. And she'd known Ranger was there not by smell, but by something else. Ranger let out another low, affirming huff. It confirmed what Rowan was beginning to suspect. In the cool, stale air of the diner, Rowan Scott knew his leave was not going to be quiet. "A nice dog," Rowan muttered to himself, watching the girl's unseeing eyes shift toward the shadow where Ranger sat. "We'll see about that." For the next week, the sweltering rhythm of Savannah and the quiet calm of the rusty anchor became a refuge for Rowan Scott. He was not a man who searched for company, yet he returned to the diner each day at 2:00, during the lull between the lunch rush and the early dinner crowd. He convinced himself it was for the coffee, strong and unassuming, but knew his true reasons ran much deeper and were far more complex. He took the same booth, his back to the wall, Ranger coiled silently below a dark shadow against the diner's checkered linoleum floor. From his post, Rowan watched Cassidy, observing her movements, a perpetual, bone-deep exhaustion she attempted to conceal behind a bright smile, a practiced smile. He saw her rub her aching lower back when she thought no one was looking, and marked how her gaze would drift to that corner table where Penny sat. Her expression, a mix of fierce love and terrified helplessness, reminded him of the faces of villagers he'd seen in war zones. They were people building a life on the edge of a precipice, a vulnerability that triggered his own protective instincts, a deeply ingrained reflex. It was honed by years of defending those unable to defend themselves. But there was another reason he stayed, one that sat at his feet, vibrating with intensity. Ranger, his German shepherd, normally the very picture of discipline, was completely fixated on Penny. Each time they walked into the diner, Ranger would strain slightly at the leash, his powerful nose working overtime. His golden eyes would lock onto the small, pale girl with the white cane. It wasn't aggression, it was a puzzle he needed to solve. And Rowan trusted his dog's instincts more than most humans. On one particularly sweltering Tuesday, the diner was nearly deserted, except for a new face sitting at the counter. Mr. Abernathy, a retired shrimper with skin like tanned leather and a voice like gravel in a mixer, was nursing a slice of lemon meringue pie. He was a neighborhood fixture, a man who spoke in fishing metaphors and knew the story behind every cracked brick on that very street. "This heat's gonna break tonight," Abernathy announced to the room, gesturing with his fork. "I can feel it in my knee." Storms rolling in off the Atlantic. Cassidy, wiping down the stainless steel coffee machine from behind the counter, offered a weary laugh. "I sure hope you're right. Mr. Abernathy, my AC unit's about to give up the ghost." She then looked over at Rowan, offering a fresh refill without him needing to ask. "You all right over there, Mr. Scott? You've been staring at that newspaper for a good 20 minutes. Without turning the page, Rowan blinked, pulling his gaze from the periphery where he'd been discreetly watching Penny. "Just thinking," he said, his voice low. Cassidy offered a genuine smile, a soft expression that briefly erased the worry lines around her eyes. "Well, don't think too hard. It's too hot for heavy thoughts." She excused herself, heading to the back kitchen to start prepping for the dinner shift. This left the dining area quiet, save for the refrigerator's hum and the rhythmic scrape of Mr. Abernathy's fork against his plate. Rowan folded the newspaper, setting it aside. He glanced down at Ranger, who had nudged a tennis ball from a side pocket of Rowan's duffel bag. The bag sat on the bench beside him. It was a yellow, slobber-covered sphere Ranger often carried like a pacifier during stressful situations. Rowan hadn't even realized it was out. Ranger rested his chin on his paws, his gaze shifting from the ball to Penny, and then back to the ball. The girl was in her usual spot, listening to an audiobook on an old cassette player, its clunky headphones covering her small ears. Her white cane was propped against the table. In the silence, Rowan watched as Ranger rose slowly to his feet. He didn't whine this time. He moved with a predator's stealth, though his body language remained surprisingly loose and almost playful. He took the tennis ball in his mouth, walked 3 paces toward the center of the room, and dropped it. The floor was slightly warped with age, a testament to the building's history. The ball refused to settle, beginning a slow, deliberate roll, painting a lazy yellow streak across the checkered tiles. It was heading straight for Penny's chair. Rowan never called the dog back. He remained perfectly still, the air caught tight in his chest, his sniper's eyes engaged. He had to see this happen as the ball rolled past the empty tables, making a faint whispering sound on the floor. Nothing loud, especially over the constant drone of the air conditioner, and whatever music was likely playing in her headphones. It should have been completely unnoticeable to a child who depended only on her hearing. The ball was on a direct path to collide with Penny's left sneaker. Rowan's gaze was fixed on her face. She was staring straight ahead. Her eyes had that cloudy, drifting quality doctors label nystagmus, a common sign of her supposed blindness. But then the tell. The moment was infinitesimal. The ball was 3 feet away, and then 2. And just before it touched the rubber sole of her shoe, Penny's eyes stopped their drifting. They shot downward, not just vaguely toward the floor, but precisely with intent, locking sharply onto the yellow object moving toward her. Her left foot twitched, shifting inward an inch, a subconscious move to block or evade it before she went rigid. The ball met her shoe with a gentle thud. Only then did she jump, a theatrical, delayed reaction that felt completely staged. She reached down her hands, fumbling through the air, searching for the very object her eyes had just tracked. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. A cold dread settled over Rowan, a chill that had nothing to do with the AC. He'd spent years peering through high-powered scopes, reading the subtle tells on a target's face before taking the shot. He knew the vast difference between an instinct and an act. He had just witnessed a girl medically certified as blind perfectly track a silent, moving object with her eyes. Ranger trotted over his tail, giving a low, gentle wag, and nudged Penny's hand with his wet nose. Penny giggled, the tension finally breaking as she stroked the dog's head. "It's the wolf again," she whispered, burying her hands deep in his thick fur. Just then, Cassidy came rushing from the kitchen. Wiping her hands on a towel, she cried, "Penny, you okay? I heard you call." Her eyes darted from the dog to the ball, and then to Rowan, anxiety stiffening her frame. "Did he bother you?" Rowan rose to his feet, sliding his sunglasses back into place, a dark shield for the suspicion now burning in his eyes. "No." Rowan set his voice level, masking the tempest of questions raging in his mind. "Ranger just dropped his ball. My apologies. He seems to think Penny wants to play." Cassidy let out a visible sigh of relief, walking over to retrieve the ball and hand it back to Rowan. "She loves animals," Cassidy said, tenderly stroking Penny's hair. "Even if she can't see them, she feels their spirit. Don't you, baby?" Penny nodded, her expression reverting to that same blank, vacant stare. "Yes, Mama," she said softly. "I felt him coming." Rowan took the ball and clipped the leash back onto Ranger's collar. He looked at Cassidy, truly looked at her. She wasn't the liar. He could read people, and her heart was plain to see. She genuinely believed her daughter was blind. She was working herself to the bone, ruining her health, and drowning in worry for a child she believed was lost in perpetual darkness. But Penny was hiding something, or someone was hiding something through her. As Rowan paid and walked into the suffocating savannah heat, the image of Penny's eyes tracking that yellow ball haunted him. It replayed endlessly in his mind, a minor detail, a hairline crack in the narrative. But for a man like Rowan Scott, that crack was all the leverage he needed to bring the entire facade crumbling down. He looked at Ranger, perched so proudly in the sidecar. "You knew!" Rowan growled, kicking the engine to life. "You knew all along!" His suspicion had now hardened from a gut feeling into a solid target, and Rowan would not avert his gaze until he uncovered the truth. The bond between a Tier 1 operator and a civilian child is seldom forged over a diner table. Yet in the days that followed, that diner booth was precisely where Rowan Scott found himself anchored. He began arriving earlier. He came during the mid-morning lull, before the humidity could turn the air into a thick soup. He told himself it was just reconnaissance, a necessary gathering of intel to confirm the suspicions that had taken root deep in his gut. But an undeniable softness was growing. It was in the way he interacted with Penny Vance. He discovered quickly that the girl was razor-sharp, with a vocabulary far beyond her 7 years. Her curiosity was a palpable energy beneath her skin. She would ask about the texture of his tires, or how the ocean sounded across the world, and why Ranger smelled of damp pine and solemn purpose. Rowan answered her questions with that same serious precision. He used for mission briefings, treating her not as some broken thing, but as an intellect demanding his full respect. However, a deeply disturbing pattern began to take shape. In the earliest hours when Cassidy first brought her in, Penny was alert, her movements, relatively sure-footed as she navigated the diner's familiar layout. But as the morning dragged on, a change would occur. A heavy fog seemed to descend upon her. She would become lethargic, her head drooping over coloring books, her hands fumbling for crayons she'd located easily an hour prior. It wasn't the natural fatigue of a child. It was the chemical heaviness of sedation. One morning, the diner air was thick with the smell of bacon, grease, and old coffee. Cassidy looked more ragged than usual, dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes. She placed a fresh pot on his table with a sigh, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "She's having a bad day," Cassidy murmured, looking at Penny, whose head rested on the table. Her small body was limp. "The pressure is up again. She says her head hurts." Rowan frowned, his intense gaze shifting to the girl. "Pressure?" Rowan asked quietly. Cassidy could only nod her head. Pulling out a chair and sinking down for a rare moment of rest, she said, "Intraocular pressure. The doctors say it builds up behind her eyes. If we don't treat it, the pain is excruciating. It's part of the condition that took her sight." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small hexagonal glass bottle of a striking cobalt blue. It was unlabeled, except for a handwritten date and a signature scrolled in silver ink. "Thank God for Dr. Thorne," she said, clutching the vial like it was a holy relic. "I don't know what we would do without him." Rowan leaned forward, his interest now piqued. "Thorne?" he asked. Cassidy's face softened with reverence. "Dr. Eris Thorne. He's a specialist, one of the best in the state. He runs the pediatric ophthalmology clinic downtown. He treats Penny completely pro bono for free," she clarified, still seemingly amazed by her own luck. "He says Penny is a special case and he wants to help. He provides these drops. They're a custom compound. Very expensive. Without him, Her voice trailed off, choking on emotion. "I couldn't afford to keep the pain away." Rowan looked at the blue vial. It didn't look like any standard pharmaceutical packaging. It looked like something from a boutique or a laboratory that didn't answer to the FDA. "Can I see that?" he asked. Cassidy hesitated for a split second before handing it over. The glass felt cool in his palm. The liquid inside was clear, slightly viscous. Rowan uncorked it with deliberate care. The scent struck him instantly, a sharp medicinal sting with a cold metallic undertone. Beneath the table, Ranger unleashed a low, vibrating growl. The fur along his spine rose, pressing stiffly against Rowan's leg. It was the dog's trained alert for hazardous materials, usually for explosives or volatile chemicals. "He doesn't like the smell," Cassidy said with a nervous laugh, quickly taking the bottle back. "It is strong, but it works. It stops the pain." She stood up. "It's actually time for her dose now." Rowan watched, his senses on high alert, as Cassidy approached Penny. "Head back, baby," she whispered. Penny whimpered slightly, a sound of genuine fear, but she obeyed, tilting her head back. Cassidy dispensed 2 drops into each of the girl's eyes. Penny squeezed her eyelids shut, her small hands gripping the table's edge, until her knuckles turned white. Rowan counted the seconds, 1, 2, 10, 20. The reaction was terrifyingly fast. When Penny finally opened her eyes, the change was visceral. Her pupils, previously a normal size, blew open, dilating so widely the blue of her irises was almost completely swallowed by black voids. It was a condition Rowan recognized from his combat medic training, extreme mydriasis, but it was the behavioral shift that chilled him to the bone. Minutes before, Penny was tired but present. Now she looked terrified as she reached for her water glass, a glass she had been using all morning, and knocked it over, shattering it on the floor. "Mommy!" she cried out, her voice rising in panic. "I can't! The shadows are gone! It's all bright! It hurts!" Cassidy rushed to clean the mess, shushing her soothingly. "It's okay, Penny. It's just the medicine working. The blurriness means the pressure is going down, you know this." She looked at Rowan, apologetic. "It makes her a little dizzy for an hour or so, but it saves her eyes." Rowan didn't say a word. He watched Penny try to stand the girl who he had suspected could see shadows just days ago was now genuinely, profoundly blind. She stumbled her legs, refusing to cooperate with her brain, and crashed into the side of the booth. She was disoriented, stripped of whatever residual vision or spatial awareness she had possessed. Ranger was no longer growling. He was whining a high-pitched distress, pulling against his leash to get to the little girl. Rowan placed a hand on the dog's head, not to correct him, but to acknowledge his warning. The dog smelled poison. Rowan smelled the lie. This wasn't medicine. Medicine didn't cause instantaneous, debilitating disorientation in a child, one who was supposedly already blind. Medicine didn't make a dog trained to detect danger bristle with pure aggression. As Cassidy cradled her sobbing daughter, rocking her back and forth, the horrifying truth crashed down on Rowan. The cure was the weapon. Dr. Thorne wasn't saving Penny's vision. He was suppressing it. The drops were likely a high-dose cycloplegic, a drug that paralyzes the eye's ciliary muscle, forcing the pupil open and blurring vision to the point of incapacitation. It explained why Penny could track a tennis ball when the drugs wore off, and why she was helpless after the treatment. Rowan stood leaving a $20 bill on the table. He needed to get out before he did something reckless like confront Cassidy or smash the blue vial against the wall. He needed intel. He had to know who Eris Thorne was and why a wealthy doctor would be systematically chemically blinding a 7-year-old girl in a Savannah diner. "We're leaving, Ranger," he said, his voice cold as ice as he walked out into the blinding midday sun. The image of Penny's dilated eyes burned into his mind. Her terrified eyes were branded into his memory, stoking a rage Rowan hadn't felt since the battlefields of his past. A Sunday in Savannah. It brought a slight reprieve from the crushing humidity, a tender mercy granted by a breeze rolling in off the river. Forsyth Park was teeming with the vibrant, chaotic energy of the weekend. The famous white fountain gushed water that sparkled like a cascade of crushed diamonds in the sunlight, and the Spanish moss draping the ancient oaks swayed gently, casting shifting lace-like shadows on the grass below. It was a setting that demanded peace, a stark contrast to the relentless tactical calculations scrolling through Rowan Scott's mind. He had finally persuaded Cassidy Vance to take the afternoon off, a feat that had demanded more negotiation than some hostage situations he had managed. She walked beside him now, looking more youthful than he had ever seen her, wearing a simple sundress instead of her stained uniform, though her gaze still darted toward Penny every few seconds with an ingrained, maternal anxiety. Penny moved a few paces ahead, her red-tipped white cane tapping against the paved path, its rhythmic clack-clack, clack, setting the tempo for their walk. Ranger trotted faithfully at Rowan's heel. His posture relaxed, but his ears swiveling like small radar dishes, cataloging every squirrel, frisbee, and running child in the vicinity. "I haven't been here in 3 years," Cassidy admitted, inhaling a deep breath of the magnolia-scented air. "Dr. Thorne says Penny shouldn't be in direct sunlight too long because of her sensitivity. But she looks so happy." Rowan watched the girl. Penny did look happy, or at the very least less burdened by her world. It had been nearly 20 hours since her last dose from the blue vial. The deep lethargy he'd witnessed in the diner had evaporated, replaced by a tentative, jerky energy. She wasn't moving with the fluid grace of a child who could see, but she wasn't stumbling either. She was navigating the crowds with a spatial awareness that defied the medical definition of total blindness. She would drift right before her cane met a trash can. She would slow her pace before a group of tourists crossed her path. It was subtle, a plausible deniability disguised as luck. But Rowan didn't believe in luck. They approached a vendor cart near the heart of the park, painted in bright stripes and manned by an elderly gentleman with a handlebar mustache and a boater hat, who looked as if he'd stepped right out of the 1920s. The sign promised Leopold's famous ice cream. Penny stopped, tilting her head. "I smell vanilla," she whispered, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips. Cassidy's laugh rang out bright and clear. "You have a nose like a bloodhound baby girl. Do you want a scoop?" She looked at Rowan. "I can go grab us some. My treat. It's the very least I can do for you, for getting us out of the house." Rowan nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "Go ahead. We'll hold this bench." As Cassidy walked away, melting into the crowd near the line, the atmosphere around the bench shifted. It was now just Rowan, the dog, and the girl. This was the moment. The ball test in the diner had been passive. Rowan needed to see a true survival reflex. He had to know if her brain was processing visual threats fast enough to bypass her conscious effort to act blind. He looked at Penny, who was standing at the edge of the path, tapping her cane idly against the toe of her sneaker. She was vulnerable, small, and seemingly helpless. Rowan felt a sharp pang of guilt, but he forced it down. The truth was worth the risk. He unclipped Ranger's leash. The German Shepherd looked up, his intelligent golden eyes locking onto Rowan's face, awaiting instruction. Rowan gave a hand signal, a sharp chop of the hand toward Penny, combined with the silent mouthing of a command known only to handlers. Riviere. In a patrol context, it meant to search and bark to confront a target. But Rowan modified it with a second simultaneous signal, a clenched fist held tightly to his chest. This meant check, a bluff charge used in training to test a decoy's nerve without ever making contact. Ranger did not hesitate. The dog exploded from his sitting position, transforming in an instant from a loyal pet into a guided missile of black and tan fur. There was no bark, no growl, just a silent explosion of motion, his paws clawing at the earth as he charged directly toward the little girl. The charge was silent, lethally fast, and terrifying to witness. Penny was looking down at her shoes, the sound of paws on the grass, almost nothing. Nearly lost beneath the sounds of a fountain, and the surrounding crowd, a blind child might have caught the rush of air, perhaps the animal's strained breathing, but only in the final fleeting moment. And she would have turned toward the sound, or simply frozen in confusion, but Penny did neither. When Ranger was a mere 10 feet away, she didn't turn her ear toward the noise. A blurred torpedo of motion entered her peripheral vision, and Penny reacted. She gasped a sharp intake of breath and dropped her cane. She didn't cover her ears. Instead, she threw her hands up to shield her face, palms outward, twisting her body precisely to the left, the exact angle of Ranger's incoming path. It was a defensive block against an impact she could see coming. "Ranger Foy!" Rowan's voice cut through the air like a whip, and the dog slammed on its brakes. His claws tore furrows in the ground as he skidded to a stop, not 6 inches from Penny's knees. He stood there panting his tail, offering a single bewildered wag. He was waiting for praise for a perfectly executed command. Penny was trembling, her hand still shielding her face, her small chest convulsing with silent terror. The silence between them was absolute, a stark contrast to the noise of the park. Rowan stepped forward, kneeling beside her. His heart pounded against his ribs. He had his answer. It wasn't a shadow, wasn't a guess. She had seen the dog. She had seen the entire attack. "It's okay," Rowan said, his voice lowering to a calming, deep rumble. He placed a steadying hand on her trembling shoulder. He stopped. He was just playing Penny. He got a little too excited. Penny slowly lowered her hands. Her eyes were wide, the pupils contracting and dilating in the sunlight, a reflex dead nerves could never perform. She looked from Ranger to Rowan, and for one fleeting, shattering second, the mask she wore fell away completely. The supposedly blind girl looked him directly in the eye, her own filled with a terrified recognition. She didn't ask what happened or what the noise was. She only whispered, He runs so fast." A chill ran down Rowan's spine. She hadn't heard the speed she had witnessed it. He gently retrieved her cane, pressing it back into her palm, as his jaw tightened with grim determination. "Yes," Rowan said, giving Ranger a subtle hand signal to lie down. "He does. You have great reflexes, Penny." I felt the wind," she stammered, reciting a line that sounded painfully rehearsed, pulling that mask of blindness firmly back into place. "The wind pushed me." "Sure," Rowan lied, brushing a blade of grass from her knee. The wind," Cassidy returned a moment later, balancing 3 quickly melting cones. She was completely oblivious that her daughter had just been subjected to a military-grade stress test. They were all out of strawberry. "So I got chocolate," she said with a bright smile, handing a cone to Penny. "Did you two have fun waiting?" Rowan's gaze flickered from Cassidy to Penny, who was licking the ice cream, her hand still trembling, her eyes once again locked on that vacant middle distance. "We had a breakthrough," Rowan said, the double meaning completely lost on Cassidy. The test was over. Penny could perceive shapes, movement, and threats, but something, the drops, the doctor, the conditioning, it was all forcing her to live in darkness. The enemy wasn't her blindness. The enemy was Eris Thorne, And Rowan Scott was done observing. It was time to go on the offensive. The Thorn Vision Institute sat poised on the edge of the historic district, like a sleek silver splinter driven into the flesh of the old city. A modern fortress of glass and steel in stark contrast to the antebellum architecture that surrounded it, radiating an aura of sterile wealth that felt deeply out of place among the moss-draped oaks. Across the street, Rowan Scott was concealed in the shadows of an alleyway. His matte black motorcycle was hidden behind a dumpster ranger, sitting silent and vigilant in the sidecar. It was 3 a.m, in the hour when the oppressive humidity finally broke. A cold mist coated everything in a slick sheen. Rowan was done looking for peace. Now he was hunting. Through his compact monocular's lens, he watched the clinic's rear exit, having spent the last 2 days building a pattern of life there. His prey was Dr. Eris Thorn, a man sculpted to be a savior, tall with impeccably coiffed silver hair. He wore tailored Italian suits and a smile plastered on billboards citywide. But to Rowan, he just looked like a target. The clinic was dark, save for security lights, but Rowan had already spotted the weak point, a service entrance for the cleaning crew. It had a faulty magnetic lock, a stunningly sloppy oversight for a man who claimed perfectionism. Rowan moved with the silence of a ghost. He signaled for Ranger to guard the bike. The dog settled into a downstay, his eyes tracking Rowan, until he disappeared into the building's shadows. The lock yielded to Rowan's tools in less than 10 seconds. Inside the clinic reeked of antiseptic and money. The floors were polished marble. The waiting room chairs were designer leather, and the walls were lined with framed articles, praising Thorn's philanthropic work. Rowan bypassed the main lobby, heading straight for the records room. He knew the layout from fire evacuation plans. He'd pulled them from the city archives earlier that day. While the door was locked, its standard keypad was no match for his brute force decoder, a tool from his tactical kit. The light turned green with a soft chirp, and he slipped inside, closing the door just as softly. Behind him, the room was lined with floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets. Despite the digital age, Thorn, it seemed, kept physical backups. Rowan activated a small red light flashlight, preserving his night vision, and then started to scan the folder labels. He wasn't just searching for Penny's file, he was looking for a pattern. He located the V section Vance Penny. The file was thick. Rowan flipped it open, scanning the medical jargon with eyes trained to spot anomalies in logistics and supply. The diagnosis was refractory congenital retinopathy, a vague term justifying aggressive treatment. But it was the billing section that truly made Rowan's blood run cold. Week after week, Thorn billed the state insurance program for high-complexity ophthalmic intervention and custom compounded pharmaceuticals. The numbers were staggering, thousands of dollars a month for a single patient. Rowan then pulled another file at random. Marcus Washington, age 6. Same diagnosis, same billing codes. He pulled a third file, Sophia Ramirez, age 8. The same. He looked at the addresses. They were all from the poorest zip codes in Savannah and the surrounding counties. Thorn wasn't running a charity. He was running a mill recruiting children from vulnerable families. Families who couldn't afford second opinions put on a miracle treatment covered by government aid while he billed the state a fortune. The children were just the raw material for his revenue stream. Rowan moved to the sample closet next. This was the primary objective. He needed proof. The shelves were stocked with standard eye drops, but in a locked refrigerator at the back, he found them rows of distinctive hexagonal cobalt blue vials. They were labeled only with a lot number and a warning, "Caution investigational use only." Rowan took 2 vials, slipping them into a padded pouch on his belt. He also photographed the billing records and patient list with a burner phone. As he turned to leave, he noticed a framed photo on Thorn's desk. It showed the doctor shaking hands with a state senator, both of them beaming. The corruption likely went much higher than just this clinic. This meant the police were not an option. Rowan needed his own cavalry. He slipped out of the building as silently as he had come in. The mist swallowed him whole. He returned to his motel room, a cheap, nondescript place near the highway. In a room thick with stale cigarettes and pine cleaner, Rowan set up his laptop. He connected a secure satellite uplink, a piece of gear he never returned to the Navy. He initiated a video call. The screen flickered to life, revealing the weary, unshaven face of Jackson Doc Miller. Jackson was a former Navy corpsman, now a private toxicologist in Virginia, with messy brown hair and thick glasses, and a mind that could dismantle a chemical weapon faster than most could make a sandwich. "It's 4 in the morning, Rowan," Jackson grumbled, sipping from a mug shaped like a beaker. "You better not be calling to ask me about dog food ingredients." Rowan raised the blue vial to the camera. "I overnighted a sample to your Dropbox yesterday from the diner's trash," Rowan said, skipping all pleasantries. "The one I labeled Subject P. Did you run it?" Jackson's annoyance vanished, replaced instantly by professional focus as he leaned in closer to the camera, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, I ran it. Mass spectrometry and gas chromatography. Rowan, where in the hell did you get this stuff?" Rowan's jaw clenched. "A doctor is giving it to a 7-year-old girl. He says that it is for her eye pressure." Jackson slammed his mug down. "Eye pressure, Rowan, that is a weaponized cocktail. Its base is cyclopentalate, a standard pupil dilator, but it's mixed with atropine, and also a powerful paralytic agent. Usually used in ocular surgery. The concentration is 5 times the safe limit for an adult, let alone a kid." Jackson pulled a chart onto his screen. "This stuff doesn't cure a thing. It paralyzes the ciliary muscle of the eye, forcing the pupil wide open and locking it right there. It destroys the eye's ability to focus. Accommodation is 0. With the pupil blown that wide, any light hitting the retina would be blindingly agonizing. The brain would eventually just shut down all visual input to stop the pain. It's chemical blinding, Rowan, if she takes this thing daily. She's functionally blind as long as the drug is in her system. Long-term, it could cause permanent retinal damage." Rowan stared unblinking at the screen, and a cold fury settled in his chest. "So she can see," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "She can actually see. But he's drugging her to make sure she can't." Jackson nodded grimly. "Exactly. And the side effects? Dizziness. Confusion, lethargy. It's systematic poisoning." Rowan ended the call without a goodbye. Staring at the blue vial in his hand, the pieces fell into place with a sickening click. Cassidy Vance wasn't a monster. She was a victim. Waking every morning, looking into her daughter's eyes and pouring poison into them, believing with all her heart she was saving her child from pain. Thorne had weaponized a mother's profound love just to line his pockets. He'd made Cassidy the jailer and Penny the prisoner. Rowan looked down at Ranger, who was sleeping by the door. The dog had known. That loyal dog had smelled the poison and the overwhelming fear. Rowan stood and holstered his sidearm. The recon phase was officially over. He had the intel, he had the evidence, and he had a clear target. He wasn't just a stranger in Savannah anymore. He was the only thing standing between an innocent little girl and a lifetime of darkness. The storm that hit Savannah that night was a bruised, angry beast, angry purple tearing across the sky with a violence that shook the windows of Cassidy Vance's small, weathered bungalow. Rain lashed against the siding like handfuls of gravel, thrown by some giant hand, and the wind howled through the cracks in the doorframe, carrying the scent of ozone and the damp, waiting earth. Rowan Scott stood on the porch water streaming off his leather jacket, his resolute face illuminated by jagged flashes of brilliant lightning. He didn't look like a customer or a friend tonight. He looked like a reckoning. He pounded on the door, the sound almost swallowed by the thunder. When Cassidy opened it, she looked small and so fragile in her oversized bathrobe, her eyes wide with fear as she took in the drenched man. The intense form of the man she once knew stood there. Beside him, Ranger sat unfazed by the rain, his gaze locked on the door with profound gravity. "Rowan," she shouted over the storm. "What are you doing here?" "It's midnight." Rowan didn't apologize. He just stepped inside. He brought the storm in with him, closing the door to silence the world's roar. He reached inside his jacket, pulling out a waterproof envelope. He slapped it onto the kitchen table with a sickening, wet thud. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and utterly devoid of warmth. "About Eris Thorne." Instantly, Cassidy's expression hardened, and she pulled her robe tightly around herself. She recoiled as if he'd struck her. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, her voice trembling with anger and utter confusion. "Dr. Thorne is a good man. He's the only reason Penny isn't screaming in agony every single day. You have no right to be here." Rowan cut her off, his voice sharp as glass. "He's not treating her, Cassidy. He is blinding her." He opened the envelope, spreading the documents across the table. The toxicology report from Jackson Miller, the damning billing records, showing the fraud, the breakdown of the chemical compound. "Read it," he commanded. "Cyclopentolate, atropine, paralytics. It's not medicine. It's a chemical restraint. He's dilating her pupils so wide that light itself is torture and billing the state for every single drop." Cassidy stared at the papers, the words blurring before her exhausted eyes. Denial, sharp and acidic, rose up in her chest like bile. It was too monstrous to be real. Because if it was real, it meant she'd been torturing her own daughter for all these years. Her mind recoiled, rejecting the truth to protect her sanity. "You're crazy," she whispered, backing away until she hit the cold counter. "You have PTSD. You're seeing enemies where there are none. Get out of my house." Rowan didn't move. He simply stood his ground, a mountain of resolve in her tiny kitchen. He softened his stance, realizing aggression would never penetrate the wall of her fear. He reached into his pocket, pulling out something he rarely showed to civilians. His trident, the golden eagle and anchor of the Navy SEALs. He set it on the table beside the toxicology report. It gleamed under the harsh kitchen light. "I swore an oath to protect the innocent Cassidy," he said, his voice finally cracking with emotion. "I don't lie about threats. I don't lie about targets. And I am telling you on my honor and on the lives of every man I served with, that man is hurting your daughter." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading with her. "I'm not asking you to believe these papers. I'm asking you to believe your own gut. Just one day. Don't give her the drops tomorrow morning. Just 24 hours. If she's in pain, I will drive you to the emergency room myself, and I will never bother you again. But if she wakes up and she can see, then you'll know." Cassidy's gaze drifted from the golden badge to the terrified determination in Rowan's face, and finally to the closed door of Penny's bedroom. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Finally, she slumped against the counter, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "One day," she whispered, her voice broken. "Just one day." The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rowan stayed on the worn sofa in the living room, while Ranger kept a silent, loyal vigil by Penny's door. Cassidy did not sleep. She sat in the rocking chair beside her daughter's bed, watching Penny's chest rise and fall, her hand desperately clutching the blue vial in her pocket. She fought the urge to give her the dose whenever Penny whimpered, just as the storm outside finally began to break, giving way to a quiet, washed-clean dawn as the sun started to slowly creep through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the floor. This was the moment of truth. Usually, this was the time Cassidy would awaken, Penny for the medicated drops. But today she let her sleep waiting until the girl stirred on her own. Penny sat up, rubbing her eyes. She didn't claw at her face in agony, nor did she cry out from the pressure. She simply blinked, her blue eyes clear, her pupils reacting naturally to the light for the first time in years. Confused, she looked around the room, her gaze tracking the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. Cassidy stood in the doorway, holding her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Penny slid from the bed and walked into the living room, her steps unsure but steady. She didn't reach for her cane. Rowan was standing by the window, the morning light catching the gold trident pinned to his black t-shirt, a beacon of authority and truth he wore to give Cassidy strength. Penny stopped in the center of the room. She looked at her mother, then turned her head and stared directly at Rowan. She squinted slightly, her eyes focusing, adjusting, working. Then she walked slowly toward him, reaching out a small, trembling hand. Ranger rose to his feet, his tail wagging slowly, his silver star-shaped ID tag jingling softly against his collar. Penny looked down at the dog, then up at the man, her finger tracing the air, pointing steadily at the golden insignia on Rowan's chest. "It shines," she whispered, her voice filled with a wonder that shattered the silent room. "It looks just like Ranger's star." The words hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. She had seen the dog's tag. She was seeing the badge. She was seeing. Cassidy let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, her knees giving way as she collapsed onto the floor, the horror of the truth crashing over her. The years of poison, the trust she had given to a monster, the time stolen from her child. But beneath the horror was a fierce, blinding relief. Her daughter wasn't broken. Rowan moved instantly, catching Cassidy while the ever-faithful Ranger moved to nuzzle Penny, who was now laughing softly, watching the dust mote swirl around her tiny hand. "She can see," Cassidy sobbed into Rowan's chest, clutching his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in her spinning universe. "Oh my God, she can see." Rowan held her tight, his own eyes hard and cold as he looked over her head at the morning sun. The test was over. The war had just begun, and Eris Thorne was going to pay. The sun had set hours ago, leaving Cassidy Vance's bungalow wrapped in a humid, suffocating darkness that felt heavy with dread. Inside, the atmosphere was not one of fear, but of calculated readiness. Rowan Scott had spent the afternoon transforming the small, wooden house into a tactical stronghold. The blinds were drawn tight, the lights dimmed to their absolute minimum, and the furniture had been subtly rearranged to create deadly choke points. Rowan stood in the center of the living room, checking the slide of his pistol before holstering it at the small of his back. He wasn't planning to use it. Lethal force was a last resort in a civilian zone, but he was a Navy SEAL, and he never entered a potential combat scenario unprepared. He looked over at Cassidy, who sat on the sofa's edge clutching Penny's hand. The little girl was calm, sensing the shift in Rowan's energy from gentle friend to lethal protector. "They will come," Rowan stated, his voice a low rumble of certainty. "Thorne knows you missed the appointment. He knows the pharmacy never got the refill request. He's losing control, and men like him make mistakes when they panic." Cassidy nodded, her face pale, but her jaw set. She trusted him completely. "What do we do?" she asked. Rowan turned his attention to Ranger. The German Shepherd was sitting by the hallway entrance, his body tense, his eyes glued to the front door. Rowan used a hand signal pointing toward the back bedroom. "Ranger, guard!" The command was unbreakable. Ranger Rose gave a soft huff to Rowan and padded to Penny, nudging her leg, guiding her and Cassidy towards the back room. "Stay in the bedroom," Rowan commanded Cassidy. "Lock the door. Don't open it until you hear my voice. Ranger won't let anyone through that door but me." Cassidy squeezed his arm, a silent thank you, before hurrying Penny to the back. The deadbolt's sharp click echoed profoundly in the deep silence. And then it was just Rowan and the shadows. 20 minutes later, a heavy engine's roar sliced through the serene chirping of the night's crickets. A black luxury sedan crunched into the gravel driveway, its headlights raking across the house front before extinguishing. Then car doors slammed shut. 3 distinct, heavy thuds. Rowan melted into the living room corner, becoming one with the deep shadows behind the imposing bookshelf. He took a slow, deep breath, his heart rate lowering, his mind honing to a single, sharp point of focus. The front door rattled. Someone was twisting the handle. Finding it locked, a heavy boot slammed into the wood by the lock. Once, twice. With a splintering crack, the frame gave way and the door burst open. Dr. Eris Thorne entered the room, flanked by 2 men who were clearly not his colleagues. Thorne looked completely unraveled, his silver hair a disheveled mess. His tie was askew, his face slick with sweat and raw fury. In one hand he clutched a black medical bag, gripping it tight like a weapon. To his left was a man Rowan instantly filed as the Brute, a hulking figure with a thick neck, a shaved head and scars streaking his knuckles. He wore a jacket 2 sizes too small. To his right was the wiry one, a nervous, twitchy man brandishing a heavy tire iron. His eyes darted nervously around the dim room. "Cassidy," Thorne bellowed, stepping fully inside. "Don't play games with me, you missed her treatment. You're endangering your daughter." The brute shut the door, sealing the exit. "She's not here, Thorne," a voice replied. Rowan said, his voice seeming to echo from everywhere and nowhere. Thorne jumped spinning as Rowan emerged from the deepest shadows. His hands were empty, hanging loosely at his sides. Thorne squinted, struggling to see the figure in the gloom. "Who are you?" Thorne demanded loudly. Trying to reclaim his composure, he blustered, "Where's Miss Vance? I'm her doctor. She has my property." "You mean the poison?" Rowan asked, taking a deliberate step forward. "The cyclopentolate mix you've been using to blind a 7-year-old little girl, for insurance money." Thorne's face went from ghostly pale to furious red. "Get him," he hissed to his hired thugs. "Teach him a lesson about privacy." The brute grinned, cracked his knuckles, and lunged. He moved with all the clumsy confidence of a barroom brawler. He wound up for a massive haymaker punch. It was a fatal mistake. Rowan didn't retreat. He advanced into the attack. He blocked the incoming arm with his left forearm, pivoting his hips, and delivering a devastating palm heel strike straight to the man's solar plexus. The air exploded from the brute's lungs in a sickening gasp. Before he could fall, Rowan swept his leg, driving him face first into the hardwood floor. With a bone-jarring thud, Rowan finished the move with a precise knee strike to the nerve cluster located in the man's thigh, rendering his leg useless. The brute groaned once and went completely limp. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. The wiry one panicked completely. He raised the tire iron, screaming as he charged. Rowan sidestepped the wild swing with almost insulting ease, grabbing the man's wrist. He twisted it using leverage and his own body mechanics until the tire iron clattered hard onto the floor. Rowan spun the man around at him, locking him in a rear naked choke, holding it just long enough to cut off the blood flow. The man's eyes rolled back as he slumped unconscious in Rowan's arms. Rowan lowered him gently to the floor and then looked up at Thorne. The doctor was staggering backward, fumbling desperately inside his jacket. His hand was trembling as he finally pulled out a small, snub-nosed revolver. "Stay back!" Thorne shrieked, aiming the weapon wildly. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Just as he boasted of Senate friends, a sound from the back bedroom erupted, stopping Thorne's heart cold. It was the deep, guttural roar of an enraged German shepherd. Ranger was hurling himself against the door, sensing the imminent threat. Thorne flinched, his eyes darting to the hallway. That split second of distraction was all Rowan required. He closed the distance in a blur. He struck Thorne's wrist, sending the firearm clattering across the floor, then slammed the doctor hard against the wall. Rowan's forearm crushing his throat. Pinning him, Rowan whispered, his face inches from the doctor's. "It's over, Eris. And you are right. You do have friends, but I have better ones." Suddenly, the room was awash in blinding red and blue lights pulsing through the window as sirens wailed. Cutting through the night, a voice amplified by a megaphone boomed from outside. "FBI federal agents, nobody move." The front door was kicked wide open as a team of agents in full tactical gear swarmed the entire room, their weapons drawn. Leading the charge was Special Agent Sterling, a sharp-eyed woman with a severe bob cut and an air of absolute, unquestionable authority. She holstered her weapon upon seeing Rowan holding Thorne. "Nice timing, Scott," Sterling said, stepping over the unconscious body of the brute. She pulled handcuffs from her belt. "Jackson Miller sent the lab results this morning. We've been building a RICO case on Thorne's billing practices for months, but we needed a violent felony to expedite the warrant. Breaking and entering with intent to harm, that'll do nicely." Rowan stepped back. Letting the agents cuff a sputtering Thorne, now crying about his rights, Agent Sterling simply nodded her head toward Rowan. "We secured the perimeter 10 minutes ago. We just waited for him to finally make his move. You cut it close with the gun, though." "I had it under control," Rowan said calmly, then turned towards the hallway. "Clear," he shouted. Cassidy, it's safe. The bedroom door flew open, and Ranger burst out first, immediately securing the room. He sniffed the cuffed men, then returned to Rowan's side. Cassidy followed, carrying Penny, her gaze falling on the unconscious men, then to the FBI agents, and finally at Thorne being dragged out. She wasn't scared anymore. She looked at Rowan, tears filling her eyes. They were not tears of fear, but of overwhelming gratitude. Thorne looked back, but Ranger let out one last menacing bark that silenced him. "He can't hurt you anymore," Rowan said, holstering his own weapon. "It's finally over." The Atlantic stretched out a shimmering expanse of turquoise and deep indigo, its waves crashing rhythmically against the warm white sand. It created a melody so different from the chaos of the last few months. Tybee Island, a short drive from humid downtown Savannah, this felt like another world entirely. The air here was crisp, carrying the clean scent of salt and sea oats, scrubbing away the lingering memories of antiseptic clinics and dark, storm-battered nights. Rowan Scott stood by the dunes, his boots gone bare feet sinking into the warm, inviting white sand. He wore a simple gray t-shirt, and his jeans rolled up, looking far less like a weapon of war, and much more like a man who had finally set down a heavy load. Beside him stood Cassidy Vance, looking utterly transformed. The dark circles that once carved hollows into her face had vanished completely, replaced by a sun-kissed glow and a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She wore a bright yellow sundress that danced in the sea breeze, a color she chose because her daughter said it looked like happiness. 3 months had passed since the FBI raid on the bungalow. The fallout was swift and absolute. The trial of Dr. Eris Thorne became the lead story on every single news station in all of Georgia. The evidence Rowan and Agent Sterling compiled was irrefutable. Thorne's defense crumbled beneath the weight of toxicology reports and the testimonies of a dozen other families who finally came forward. After the story broke, the judge, a stern woman with no tolerance for the exploitation of the innocent, delivered a sentence that guaranteed Thorne would die in prison. All his assets were seized and sold, creating a restitution fund for his victims, paying for the true medical care they were so cruelly denied. The Thorne Vision Institute was an empty husk, its sign torn down, its dark chapter closed. But on the beach, Rowan wasn't thinking of courtrooms or hollow victories. He was witnessing a miracle race across the sand. Penny was 50 yards out near the ocean's edge, no longer tapping a cane. She wasn't taking hesitant, uncertain steps. She was sprinting, her blonde hair flying behind her like a banner as she chased a bright orange frisbee. She wore a pair of thick-rimmed, vibrant pink glasses, a prescription from a real specialist that fixed the refractive errors the poison hadn't caused, but had cruelly hidden. Her sight wasn't perfect. The doctor estimated she'd recovered about 80%, and a sensitivity to light might always remain. But for Penny, 80% was the entire world. It was the line between a life of shadows and one filled with seagulls' waves and the faces of those she loved. Galloping beside her was Ranger, the German shepherd, having traded his tactical vest for the freedom of the shore. He barked with pure joy, a booming echo over the surf as he leaped into the air, snatching the frisbee before landing in the shallow foam. He wasn't her protector anymore. He was her playmate. The bond between them was still the strongest force on that beach. Only now it was forged in happiness, not just survival. "I still can't believe it," Cassidy whispered, her hand brushing gently against Rowan's. "Seeing her run like that. For so many years I told her to be careful, to slow down, to always hold my hand. Now I have to tell her not to run too far ahead." She gazed up at Rowan, her face etched with a profound, quiet gratitude. "She asked me this morning if the ocean was blue or green. She argued with me that it was teal." Rowan chuckled, the sound a low rumble in his chest. "She knows her colors better than I do. She's making up for lost time," he said, his voice soft. "She has an entire world to see." Cassidy squeezed his hand, her fingers weaving into his. It was a simple, natural gesture that spoke of a partnership forged through absolute hellfire. "And what about you, Rowan?" she asked, her tone shifting to serious. Do you miss it? The teams, the missions? Rowan gazed at the horizon where a distant cargo ship crawled toward the port. He thought of the letter he'd submitted to his CO just 2 weeks ago. It was not an easy choice to leave the Navy. Being a SEAL had defined him for more than a decade. But watching Penny's laughter as Ranger shook ocean water all over her, he knew his mission parameters had fundamentally changed. He no longer wanted to fight for an idea of peace on the other side of the planet. He wanted to defend the peace he had found right here. He had discovered a new purpose, one that didn't demand a rifle, but required every ounce of his vigilance and loyalty. "No," Rowan answered, squeezing her hand in return. "I don't miss it. I spent my whole life searching for a mission that truly mattered. I think I finally found it." He wasn't a soldier without a war anymore. He was a man who finally had a family. He looked down at Cassidy, seeing his whole future reflected in her eyes. "Besides," he added with a rare, crooked smile, "someone has to teach Ranger how to be a civilian. He still tries to clear the perimeter of the yard before he does his business." Cassidy laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We'll work on it," she murmured. "We have all the time in the world." Down by the water, Penny stopped and turned to face them, waving both arms high above her head. Her pink glasses flashed in the sunlight. "Mom, Rowan! Look at this!" she yelled, her voice full of pure joy. He pointed as a pelican dove into the waves, crying, "Did you see him?" Rowan simply waved back. His heart swelled with a feeling he hadn't recognized in years' contentment. Ranger let out another long bark, a deep sound of pure freedom, before he raced up the beach, circling Rowan and Cassidy as if to say, "This is the pack. We are all together." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in strokes of violet and gold. They were colors Penny could name now. Rowan Scott inhaled the salt air. The darkness was gone, the shadows had finally lifted. And for the first time in his life, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs this message of hope, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. I pray God blesses you with eyes to see the truth and the strength to act on it. May He surround your home with guardian angels, keep your children safe from hidden dangers, and grant you the peace that comes after a storm. May your life be filled with the same light and joy that Penny found on that beach. If you believe God is a protector and a revealer of truth, please type Amen in the comments below. Let us claim that protection for our families together today. God bless you, and until next time.